Salam, peace be upon you. My name is Muhammad Layak Siddiqui, the father of holophase. We learned that pattern comes first. Phi is circular comparability. Only relations are public. Reading is windowed, local, bounded, stitched globally, topological, and sometimes defect bearing. Now we pause and gather the whole picture before entering identity. Phi pattern science, the complete foundation. Part 16. First full synthesis of Phi pattern essence, pre-identity. The story of gathering the whole path into one clear picture before asking the central question, when are two descriptions the same pattern? There comes a moment in every serious journey when continuing forward too quickly becomes dangerous. Not because the road ahead is blocked, not because there is nowhere to go, but because the next part of the journey is so deep, so delicate, and so easily confused that if we carry forward even a small hidden mistake, the whole structure can begin to drift. That is where we are now. We have already climbed a very high mountain. We began with almost nothing. Not objects, not particles, not forces, not space, not time, not observers, not meaning. We began with something even simpler and deeper, the possibility that one thing could differ from another. From that tiny beginning, step by step, we built an entire foundation for pattern science. Now, before we ask the next great question, we must stop. We must gather everything we have learned. We must place it in one clear picture. We must hold the entire foundation in our hands at once and say, this is what we have built. This is what it means. This is what it does. This is what it does not yet do. That is the work of this part. This part does not add a new primitive. It does not introduce a new law. It does not sneak in identity, persistence, emergence, or dynamics before their time. It does something more disciplined than that. It locks the foundation. Think of a long woven carpet. For many parts, we have been knotting thread after thread. One thread introduced primitive comparability. Another introduced circularity. Another brought relational publicness. Others added windows, lifts, jets, time-space motion readouts, domains, excisions, boundaries, stitching, topology, and defects. By now, the carpet is large, rich, and intricate. But before we continue weaving its next great section, we must step back and see the full pattern already made. Otherwise, we may pull the wrong thread and distort the whole design. So let us gather the carpet. Let us tell the story again, but now as one continuous picture. The next stage of the framework will ask one of the most dangerous questions in all of thought. When are two descriptions the same pattern? That sounds simple, but it is not simple at all. Two descriptions may use different language, different coordinates, different windows, different instruments, different lifts, different boundary assumptions, different local charts, and still refer to the same pattern. Or they may look very similar and yet secretly differ in topology, in domain, in boundary, in defect content, or in some other deep structural way. If we do not already know what a pattern is, then the identity question becomes hopelessly slippery. This is why the synthesis matters. A synthesis is not a luxury. It is not repetition for its own sake. It is a discipline against drift. It fixes the vocabulary. It restores the dependency order. It reminds us what has been established and what has not. It prevents us from accidentally importing later ideas too early. It keeps the framework clean. In simple language, before asking whether two things are the same pattern, we must first be absolutely clear about what counts as a pattern at all. That is what we now do. The whole chain retold as one story. At the beginning, we challenge one of the oldest habits of thought. Most people assume the world is made of things first and patterns later. First, there are objects, and then sometimes those objects arrange themselves into patterns. But the more closely we looked, the less stable that idea became. Before you can identify any object, you must already be able to detect repeatable structure. Before you can say, this is a tree, that is a star, or here is a person, you must already be working with comparison, distinction, relation, and recognizable regularity. In other words, you are already using pattern. So the framework began with a reversal. Pattern is not secondary. Pattern is primary. That first step was decisive. It changed the whole direction of the science. Objects no longer sat at the bottom. Pattern did. But then a deeper question appeared. If pattern is primary, what makes pattern possible? What must already be true before any pattern can exist? The answer was primitive comparability itself, the bare permission for distinction. Not a thing, not a substance, not energy, not space, not time, not consciousness, just the root condition that this could differ from that. We named this primitive phi. Phi was never introduced as a little object hiding underneath everything else. It was introduced as the most minimal structural permission. Without it, nothing could be compared, distinguished, or publicly spoken of at all. Then another question arose. If phi is primitive comparability, what shape should it have? A straight line would secretly smuggle in an absolute beginning, a privileged zero, a hidden origin. But primitive comparability cannot start by privileging one point as the true point of comparison. That would already exceed the public relational content available at the foundation. So the line was not enough. The deeper answer was circularity. Phi is not best understood as line valued, but as circle valued. This means primitive comparability has the structure of return, closure, recurrence, and no privileged absolute beginning. A circle allows relation without an absolute zero. It allows differences, offsets, loops, winding, and global memory. It allows the possibility that continuity can produce discrete residues. This was one of the great structural turns of the framework. From that moment on, it became clear that absolute phi is not public. If phi is circle valued, then different labelings of the circle can shift by a constant amount without changing the actual public structure. So what is public is not the absolute value of phi at a point. What is public is the difference between phi values, or the invariant structures built from those differences. This gave us the gauge relational principle. Public pattern content lives in what survives lawful relabeling. That immediately forced another discipline into view, anti-smuggling. If public structure lives only in invariant relations, then hidden assumptions can easily fake public pattern. A person can secretly choose boundaries, resolutions, pre-processing steps, equivalence rules, or interpretive filters that materially change the outcome, then present the result as if the pattern simply revealed itself. This is smuggling. So we install the firewall. Every material assumption must be declared. That rule became central. It meant that the science of pattern could not rely on hidden defaults, silent baselines, implicit transforms, or undeclared interpretive jumps. If a choice matters, it must be visible. Soon after, another confusion had to be removed. Not all claims are the same kind of claim. Saying there is a pattern here is not the same as saying this pattern persists, or this caused that, or this predicts that, or this means something else. These are different claim types. They need different tests, different falsifiers, different uncertainty forms, and different standards of certification. So we installed type discipline. Every public pattern claim must declare its type. Then came another separation that proved foundational, the fourfold identity. Ordinary language tends to collapse everything together. We talk as if the pattern, our statement about the pattern, the verdict on that statement, and the evidence supporting it were all the same thing. But they are not the same. The pattern is one thing. The claim about the pattern is another. The certificate about the claim is another. The artifacts supporting the claim are another. This separation was essential. Without it, revisions of wording can be mistaken for pattern changes. Certification can be mistaken for truth itself. Missing evidence can be mistaken for missing reality. So we locked these four identities apart. Next, the framework faced a humbling truth. No claim comes from nowhere. Every observation, every reading, every measurement, every detection occurs through a finite access condition. We never see the whole pattern from nowhere. We always see through a window, a declared region, duration, resolution, sampling density, and set of observational conditions. This was not treated as a weakness. It was treated as structural honesty. Public knowledge is finite, situated, and windowed. Once we had the window, we could ask, what is the first readable phase of pattern inside it? The answer was simple and deep: difference. Not absolute phi, not the whole pattern, not meaning. Difference, contrast, variation. The fact that here is not the same as there, or now not the same as then. Difference became the first public legibility of pattern. But because phi is circle valued, reading local change is not trivial. You cannot globally treat a circle like a line without ambiguity. So the framework introduced lifts, lawful local unwrappings of phi into a temporary linear representation inside the neighborhood. From a lift, the first local carrier of change becomes readable. In equation language, this was written as A equals d phi tilde. In words, A is the differential of the local lift. It is not the pattern itself. It is the first carrier of local pattern change. This opened the door to the derivative ladder. Once a local lift is available, we can speak not only of local value behavior, but of the first differentiation of phi pattern, then the second, then the third, and so on. The first differentiation gives the nearest readable echo of how the pattern changes locally. But because the same underlying differentiated pattern can be read in more than one way, this first differentiation does not echo in only one direction. It echoes simultaneously across what later appear as time, space, and motion. The same differentiated structure can be read as cadence, as texture, and as flow. In that sense, the derivative ladder is never merely mathematical. It is already the seed of the simultaneous echo of time, space, and motion. Then came the idea of jets. Patterns are not exhausted by a value and a first derivative. Their local phase is layered. There is value-like behavior, rate-like behavior, curvature-like behavior, and higher-order local variation. A jet is the layered local fingerprint of a pattern up to some finite order. But because our access is finite, our readable depth is finite too. We never certify infinite local detail. We certify only what our window can support, up to a declared ceiling and uncertainty budget. From this layered local structure came the triunity readout. The same differentiated pattern can be read through three coordinated phases: cadence, which later supports the readout of time; texture, which later supports the readout of space; flow, which later supports the readout of motion. Time, space, and motion were therefore not treated as primitive containers already waiting in the background. They were treated as readouts of one underlying differentiated pattern structure. But pattern language does not work everywhere equally. Some operations are lawful in one part of a window and unlawful in another. So the distinction between window and domain became necessary. A window is where we look. A domain is where a specific operation is lawful. Some regions must be excised because language breaks down there. Some regions produce counterfeit appearance due to undersampling. This counterfeit appearance is aliasing. This taught one of the most difficult lessons of the framework. Honest silence is part of science. There are places where the lawful statement is not "here is the pattern," but "here language becomes undefined." Then boundaries entered. Edges are not external annoyances. They shape what the pattern can be. Hidden boundaries produce false invariants, false persistence, false symmetry, and false emergence. So a pattern claim without declared boundaries is incomplete. Boundaries help constitute the pattern. Still, no single window sees the whole. Local access is never enough by itself. So the framework moved to the Atlas principle. A global pattern exists through the lawful stitching of local charts across overlaps. The pattern as a whole is not simply assumed. It is built by ensuring that local descriptions are compatible where they overlap. Transition relations are part of the global structure. And then the most surprising global truth emerged. Local smoothness is not enough. A pattern can carry memory around closed loops that no local patch reveals. When you traverse a loop in a circle-valued pattern, the total change may return only up to whole turns. This produces winding, holonomy, and global memory. Here, discreteness arises naturally from continuity plus closure. Integers come not from a primitive quantization postulate, but from the topology of return. Finally, where global stitching fails irreducibly, defects appear. Defects are not mistakes or impurities added from outside. They are stable obstructions in the pattern's own global structure. They can carry charge, persist, link with each other, and perhaps later support particle-like behavior. The defect is not noise. The defect is part of the pattern. This is the chain, from primitive comparability to circularity, from circularity to public relation, from public relation to discipline claim structure, from finite access to local readability, from local readability to layered signatures, from layered signatures to time-space motion readouts, from lawful limits to boundaries and stitching, from stitching to topology, from topology to defects. That is the path we have built. Now let us say the whole thing as simply as possible. A phi pattern is not a little thing sitting somewhere. It is the lawful invariant structure of comparability that becomes publicly readable through differences, local signatures, boundaries, stitching, topology, and defects under finite declared conditions of access. That is the core. Or more gently, a phi pattern is the stable public shape of distinction itself, made readable through lawful comparison. At this point, the foundation is already very rich. We know what pattern is in the pre-identity sense. We know how it becomes publicly readable. We know its local and global structure. We know how it can carry memory. We know how defects can belong to it. But some central questions are still ahead. We have not yet fully answered. When two descriptions are the same pattern, how equivalence is certified, how persistence is defined, how lawful transformation and change are structured, how patterns interact and compose, how emergence is formally certified, how observers, meaning and public institutions, enter, how full public science is constitutionally protected. That is important. The synthesis must not pretend those things are already done. This is a pre-identity synthesis, not a complete theory of everything. Why this synthesis matters beyond the framework? There is also a human lesson here. In life, people often collect fragments without ever weaving them into a whole. They learn something from pain, something from work, something from love, something from failure, something from silence. But they never stop long enough to gather the pieces into one picture. So when the next great question arrives, they face it as fragments rather than as a whole person. This synthesis says, do not rush. Gather what you know. Lock the ground beneath your feet. Then ask the deeper question. Science needs that. Relationships need that. Communities need that. A human life needs that. A synthesis is not the end of movement. It is what makes deeper movement possible without collapse. The rigor of the pause. Because this part is a synthesis, it must obey strict discipline. It may not introduce a new primitive. It may not alter earlier definitions. It may not smuggle in later concepts as if they were already established. It may not answer the identity question before the identity framework is installed. Its task is only this: summarize faithfully, consistently, and clearly. So part 16 acts as a lock. It stabilizes vocabulary, it stabilizes dependency order, it stabilizes scope. It marks what is established and what remains ahead. That is why this pause is rigorous, not decorative. The final readiness. Now we are ready. We know that pattern is primary. We know phi as primitive comparability. We know circularity. We know that only relations are public. We know the anti-smuggling discipline. We know claim typing. We know the fourfold identity. We know windows. We know difference. We know lifts and the first carrier of local change. We know jets and finite readability. We know the differentiated echoes that later read out as time, space, and motion. We know domains, excisions, aliasing, and lawful silence. We know boundaries. We know atlases and stitching. We know topology and global memory. We know defects. The ground is laid. Now the next unavoidable question stands before us in full light. When are two descriptions the same phi pattern? That is where the next phase begins. And because we paused here, gathered everything, and locked the foundation, we can now approach that question without drift, without blur, and without forgetting what a pattern already is. That is the purpose of this synthesis. That is the gift of part 16. And that is where we now stand. Always, peace be upon you.